the rebels attacked a US ship with a drone off Yemen.
The naval forces of the Yemeni armed forces carried out a targeting operation against the US vessel Genco Picardy in the Gulf of Aden with a number of appropriate naval missiles, and the strike was accurate and direct, thanks to God.
US President Joe Biden has acknowledged that the Americans and British bombardment has so far failed in its objective of stopping attacks by the Houthis on vessels in the Red Sea. Washington nonetheless plans to continue the attacks and hold the Houthis accountable for their actions, but not at the expense of Yemenis. But it's easier said than done, since the Houthi rebels effectively govern vast areas of Yemen, including the capital Sana'a. It's a complicated mix, and a single misstep could result in a major catastrophe.
Once a bastion of peace in Latin America, Ecuador has been plunged into crisis after years of unchecked mushrooming influence of transnational narco gangs who use its ports to ship cocaine to the United States and Europe. It suffered a recent surge in violence that was triggered by the 7th of January prison escape of one of the country's most powerful narco bosses, Jose Adolfo Macias, better known by his alias Fito. But the gangs have retaliated with their own declaration of war on the state. In 30 different attacks across the country, more than 200 prison staff were taken hostage. Bombings took place in several cities, and even a state-owned television station was attacked during a live broadcast. In an intimidatory tactic, the public prosecutor who was investigating the dramatic attack was gunned down by the criminal gangs on the 17th of January in Guayaquil, which is now rapidly gaining notoriety as the most dangerous city in Ecuador. Our next report gets more details.
Barely 2 months into his term, 36-year-old Ecuadorian President Daniel Noboa finds himself at the center of an all-out war between the government and the powerful narco gangs. On Wednesday, in a brazen attack undoubtedly meant to convey a message or two, the public prosecutor Cesar Suarez, investigating a dramatic attack on the set of a public television channel, was shot to death in Guayaquil. Prosecutor Cesar Suarez, who in the past had carried out other high-profile investigations, was shot while driving to a court hearing.
In view of the murder of our colleague Cesar Suarez, prosecutor of the National Unit specialized in investigations against transnational organized crime in Guayas, I am going to be emphatic. Organized crime groups, criminals, terrorists will not stop our commitment with the Ecuadorian society. We will continue with more strength and commitment.
This isn't the first time the gangs have targeted a prosecutor. In June last year, Leonardo Palacios was mowed down in the town of Duran near Guayaquil. And a year earlier, in 2022, 2 prosecutors and a judge had been shot dead. In connection with the murder of the prosecutor Suarez, 2 men have been apprehended. Noteworthy is the fact that prosecutor Suarez was also in charge of Metastasis case involving an Ecuadorian drug lord, who allegedly received favorable treatment from judges, prosecutors, police officers, and high-ranking officials. The prosecutor had been put in charge of finding the gang responsible for the terror-inspiring attack on the state-owned TC television network on the 8th of January in the port city of Guayaquil. Hooded assailants armed with guns and explosives had stormed the TV station, firing gunshots and forcing staff to lie on the ground. The mayhem continued for 30 minutes when police entered the studio and arrested 13 assailants, many of whom were barely out of their teens. Ecuador, over the past 5 years, has become a hub for the global export of cocaine from neighbors Colombia and Peru. In a country of about 17 million people, there are more than 20 criminal gangs, in excess of 20,000 members in all. The government last week had declared war on powerful drug gangs, who in turn retaliated with a wave of attacks which left about 20 people dead.
I stand also in solidarity with the families, but we are in a state of war. We are in a state of war and we cannot give in to these terrorist groups.
Will Noboa, who had pledged to curb violence of narco gangs in his election campaign, succeed in his fight against narco gangs? A panic-stricken, anxious nation where the murder rate has quadrupled in the last 5 years awaits.
The Union of the Comoros is an island nation along East Africa. It happens to be one of the poorest nations in the world. 45% of its 870,000 population languishes below the poverty line. The impoverished country has witnessed more than 20 coups and attempted coups post gaining independence in 1975. On the 14th of January, the first round of presidential elections were held to select the national leader from 6 candidates for the next 5 years. And the incumbent president, the former coup leader Azali Assoumani, emerged victorious, but the poll was marred by opposition claims of ballot rigging and also a very low turnout. Now, barely 2 days after the announcement of the re-election of Assoumani, there were street battles between soldiers and angry opposition supporters that erupted. At least 1 person was killed and 6 others were wounded, apparently shot by live rounds. Our next report gets more details.
The Electoral Commission of Comoros announced on Tuesday that the incumbent president, 65-year-old Azali Assoumani, had garnered 63% of the votes in Sunday's ballot, thereby securing a 4th term as president. The declaration triggered violent protests the next day after opposition parties cried foul, terming the results fraud and demanding an annulment. Several roads in the capital, Moroni, were barricaded and an unspecified number of protesters apprehended. To curb the spreading unrest, a nighttime curfew was imposed. Despite the preventive measures, buildings were vandalized, looted and set ablaze, including the home of a minister.